Greetings! I'm going to cover some ways to set up a USB keyboard for live performance using Ableton Live. There's a few different methods that kind of work better for different types of players and different workflows, and I'm going to show some of the ways that you can set up a keyboard in Live to play sounds live. This video sort of loosely follows on from a previous one that I've made about my go-to key sounds, but I think it's equally important how I kind of implement these in a live set. So personally, for my performances, I like to use a lot of different sounds in my project, so a lot of different VST plugins, various effects and things like that, so that I can achieve quite a few different things just with the one device. It's quite convenient for touring and playing live, like minimizing the amount of equipment that you need to do things, basically. When you start getting into sort of trying to play electronic music and having a lot of different synth tones and stuff, it can just quite quickly become quite a lot to stay on top of, and it can get pretty messy. So yeah, this is pretty much just some of the ways that I've come up with to kind of deal with that. Basically everything that I'm going to talk about here is just stuff that I wish I knew when I started out and was trying to figure out ways of using my USB keyboard that I bought for music production actually as my live keyboard. I think that there are so many cool creative and technical possibilities that make performing live a real joy rather than a kind of stress, and there are some methods that can work really, really well for anyone who's sort of gigging and needs to be able to do a lot of things quickly for a live setup. So I'm just going to jump right in. Here I am with a blank, completely fresh Ableton project open, so I can kind of talk through this bit by bit. The obvious way to start, I'm just going to load up like an E-piano, just to start with something basic, and we can put that on there. So the obvious thing to do is to then start maybe assigning some controls. So let's map the volume to a slider. So the way to do that is to click this MIDI button in the top right, and then you'll see that a lot of things turn blue, and that's just showing us like everything that you can assign a MIDI control to. So yeah, if I click that, you'll see that little box appears around the control, and then if you touch the control that you want this to be applied to, it assigns it. So that just did it there. One quick thing to bear in mind with the volume master slider is by default it sets the maximum value to plus 6 dB. Just go ahead and hit that back to 0. The reason being, hang on, I'll put it back to 6. The reason being, when you reach, if you push that to its limit at the top, you can see it's boosted that sound up above 0 dB, and that could cause clipping. Yeah, ideally you want to set the maximum volume, somewhere sensible. That doesn't happen. So for example, I'll try maximum at -6. When I push that to the top, it doesn't go. Cool. The next thing that we can do is map the send controls. So I've just assigned A to this knob here, A on that knob and B on this knob. And A and B sends are here. So A is a reverb, and B is the delay. Cool, so that's kind of like the basic way to control a sound, right? But what happens if you want to have more than one sound? Well, this is where things get a little bit kind of fiddly and a little bit annoying. So let's say you want to have a electric piano sound and a lead synth, right? So the obvious solution would be to just create a new track. I'm going to load this synth called Analog onto that. And yeah. Now I have a live synth. I'm just going to replace my reverb. I had a vintage verb. Let's delete that. You can see that I'm controlling the reverb send for my E-piano track, but not analog. So if I wanted to, if you select the send A for the analog track, and I touch the same knob that it's applied to on the E-piano, it should do both. Yeah, so that kind of works, but imagine, again, you've got more sounds than that. Quickly, things are going to become a bit of a nightmare to actually stay on top of and sort of remember everything unless you label your keyboard with tape and write on it what things are. But even then. Okay, so let's say most people want to be able to change between the two tones live. I want to be able to have a button maybe that controls turning on the E-piano, or I want to be able to scroll through and, change from one to the next. The obvious way that you might think to do that is to assign these speaker on-off buttons, right? So I've just mapped the on-off of the E piano to this button 1 here, and I'm going to do the same on button 2 for the analog synth, and I'll show you what happens here. So I'm playing my lead synth, and I want to change back to my E piano here, right? So what do? Oh, I've just accidentally turned off both my sounds. So yeah, you need to be a bit careful if you're doing this, right? To alternate them, you have to have one track on, one track off, and then press both buttons at the same time to switch between, you see? Luckily there as well, I had the monitoring mode set correctly, but if I change that to auto... there's no sound. There's no sound coming from the E piano when I switched it there, which is really annoying. Why is that? Because I didn't toggle this little sneaky red arm button here. So if you hold command and click, then that's enabled. If I didn't hold command and I just clicked, see how it just switches from one to the next? So that's just another like pain in the arse thing that you've got to check every single time you load up your project. And if you imagine that you've got like loads of these, multiple sounds, hopefully this is starting to illustrate like the amount of things that can go wrong if you use this method for live performance. But essentially that's working. It's just not ideal. If anybody knows how to set that up as a toggle on one button so it switches between the two, I wonder if I can actually, I think I know how to do that. If I map these both to the same button, so you can see they're both on 66, and if I invert these minimum and maximum values, that should do it, I think. Hang on. No. Let's try that. There we go, so it's got to be 0, 0, 1, 1, 0. Okay, so that works for 2 sounds, but if you're swapping more than 2, then things start to get a little bit of a nightmare doing it that way. What can you do after that? So the method that I prefer to use, instead of having multiple tracks, is to just simply have one track. I'm going to delete everything, go back to 0 here, so that I don't have any MIDI assignments. Let's get rid of everything. So we're back to 0. So the better way to do this, I think, is to use something in Ableton called the instrument rack. So let's drag that in. I'm going to rename this track to just USB keys. So now this one track just corresponds to whatever's going on this boy, right? So, and now I can load up more than one instrument or plugin on this single USB keys track, which is really handy. If you press this little button there, that little looks like 3 dots and 3 lines. So there we go. That's the 2 plugins that I just had loaded down just to one track. And by default, if I play a key, you can see it's playing both of these sounds at the same time, right? So I can recreate the way that I had things set up there, I'm pretty sure. 1, 2, 0, 1, 1, 0. There we go, that's exactly the way I had things set up on 2 tracks before, but now with 1. But something you might have noticed that is, I think, a little bit suboptimal about the way that this is set up is the fact that when I change sound, the trail just cuts off abruptly, right? The signal just cuts out instantaneously from one to the other. Now you might actually want that because you can kind of create... You could manually create like a stutter effect, but it's generally kind of like, unless you're doing something really specific, which I sometimes do with like glitchy IDM tracks. But generally speaking, that sudden abrupt cut is that's pretty unmusical, right? And we generally want each part to kind of trail off and link into the next one. Like I want that trail to continue when I switch to the next sound. So the way to do that, instead of having that MIDI assignment, get rid of that, turn both the speakers back on. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the chain selector. So if you see this little chain knob here, hit chain, and then by default it stacks up all your sounds to the 0, 0 value here, right? So all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that blob that corresponds to analog, and I'm just going to drag it so that it says 1-1. And you can see this tiny little blue line, this thing here, grab that, make sure that's on 0, click that, then hit the MIDI button. And now if I press my 1 button That did not work. Hang on. There we go. Yeah, so you have to make sure it's properly highlighted. But yeah, you can see the control. I'm now controlling the chain selector, right? And if I hit the button, you see it's jumping backwards and forwards between 0 and 127. Where if I just hit the MIDI button again, change that maximum value to 1. And now, if I play a chord on the Rhodes and then change sound, my Rhodes chord should carry on with it. So, oh, that's embarrassing. Oh, it's because I've got analog disabled. Let's try that again. Amazing. So yeah, that's really cool. The two sounds now bridge from one to the next and they don't just abruptly cut off. So that's pretty cool. Trouble is that if I now add a third sound and I maybe assign that, let's drag that to, what is it? 2. And if I change the maximum value to 2 and I start hitting this knob, unfortunately now it's jumping between 0 and 2. Kind of not great. In order to get it to actually scroll through and be able to select any of those sounds, I have to change from a button to a knob. I should be able to scroll through those sounds, right? So when that's all the way to the right, I'm on operator. Somewhere in the middle is analog. And then all the way to the left, I get the electric piano back. So that's another way that you can set things up to be able to switch between things. I'm not a huge fan of that, just because, again, if you can imagine that in an actual live context, and if you have a lot of sounds loaded up in this instrument rack, you've got to be really precise with where you position that knob and make sure it's like in the exact right spot for where you want to be. If it's all the way to the left or all the way to the right, you can probably do that pretty quickly. But yeah, if you need to adjust it to like right there, in the middle of like a solo, why would you do that to yourself? Another slightly more reliable way is to use the scenes here in Ableton. So I'll show you that method very, very quickly. Again, let me delete any MIDI controls. So if I right click on an empty space here, right insert MIDI clip, just to make this make a bit of sense, I'm gonna call that Rhodes. If I double click this clip that I just made, this MIDI clip, and I click this little button here, this is now showing me all the parameters that I can automate on this track within this blob, right? So I'm going to select the instrument rack, I'm going to select the chain selector, and I'm going to define this one as 0, which is where our E piano is, right? And if I just copy that region down, I'm going to open it up again, I'm going to raise that automation line to 1, which corresponds to analog, right? So I'm going to rename that analog, and I'm going to copy that down, simply repeat the process, raise that up to 2, and that's for operator. And now when I launch one of these scenes, let's do that. Cool. So that's kind of useful. And yeah, if you imagine if this was like, I don't know, song 1, song 2, song 3, this starts to become really, really useful for live performance, obviously, because you can set all your settings for what you want for each song. And then you know, as soon as you press that, your sound is going to be exactly where everything needs to be. I just want to demonstrate something really useful about that. So if I manually assign send B, which is a reverb, to this knob here, right? And let's say, okay, so let's say that happens at the end of song 1, and I'm like, woo, yeah, thanks everybody. I'm going to play song 2 for you now. And then I go to start song 2, and let's say song 2's not meant to start with a delay on the part, and I've forgotten to do that. You can save yourself by just automating in that delay to be at 0 for this song. Observe what happens to the send there. See how it zeroes itself when I go to song 2. Not only has it changed the synth patch to be the right one I need for the song, but you can also set all the effects exactly where you want them to be for any particular moment in the song as well. So let's imagine that plays. Your song wouldn't be only 4 bars long, but if you have a song that's only 4 bars long and at the end of that you want the delay to come up, right? Let's see what happens here. So hopefully you're starting to kind of see some of the possibilities and why this is like a pretty effective method for doing things. It takes out a lot of the sort of having to worry about little things like, you know, remembering to turn up the delay. So for example, I want to be able to control the time so I can mess with the delay, but I want to be able to have a hand free to play a part, but I don't want to have to worry about turning up the delay effect itself. I just want that to come in and then I can have a control to mess with it. Let me show you what I mean. If I go to that delay, I'll go to MIDI, take the delay out of that sync mode. I'm going to grab the time control. I'm going to assign that to this knob here. So time, assign to there. So I can still fuss about with the delay and I can still assign things to control parameters manually so that you can do like live effects processing and that kind of thing, right? But you're not worrying about just the dry wet control, like that's getting handled for you. Let me show you an example of what that would be like. So that's pretty cool. I could use both my hands to play chords and stuff. I wasn't really playing anything complicated there, but if you imagine that you were playing like a more technical part with both hands and at the end of it you want a delay to rise up, then you want to stop and do some whittling. I don't know, I just think that's like a really fun, freeing way to set things up so that you can just focus on like the fun aspects of playing live, right? Rather than worrying about like the technical aspects of it so much. Obviously this takes a bit of setup to do, but once it's done, it's really effortless and things just kind of like play themselves. And I think that it opens up these like crazy creative possibilities that aren't really possible by doing everything manually. The only other thing I dislike about using the session view, which is this screen, in Ableton, is if you start getting into this quite a bit, you might end up in circumstances where you have individual scenes within songs, right? So you might have verse 1, verse 2, chorus, then you might have like a bridge, and you see like how already I've got that many scenes just for one song. So by the time you get to the end of like a whole set list of maybe like, I don't know, 10 songs or whatever, imagine how ridiculous and long this is. It's just like looking at it vertically. If you have something like an Ableton Launchpad, you can just hit each scene, scroll through the set list that way. So yeah, some of those manual methods for changing sounds I think work really well. Let's say if you and your band improvise live quite a lot, if you want to not be constrained to a specific structure and stuff, and you like to kind of like jam the lengths of sections and stuff, then my method that I'm about to show for you probably isn't going to work because it's very much to do with everything happening at specific points. And the way that my live set works is like I am always playing to a track that I've already produced in software, so it's always to a specific BPM value. I'm playing to backing tracks and electronic beats and stuff that obviously have like predetermined section lengths and that sort of thing, so I'm kind of constrained. But the way that I set everything up is to give myself some control of effects processing. A way to describe it is like the song structures and the lengths of things generally are always the same, but it's what happens within them that we do differently every single time, and it does sound a little different every single time I play it because I will do different keys parts or different effects processing in each section that kind of switches things up. So yeah, no two versions of our live performances of a song are ever exactly the same. They're always different. If you're making that kind of thing and what you want to do live is that, then I think that this is just the method to do it, like the best one that is so free of potential cock-ups and stuff. This just makes it the most reliable way, and it's to do everything in the arrangement view of Ableton. Yeah, I just want to give an example of like a little slice of how I sort of do stuff live and why Ableton is good for that. Here are some example backing track stems that are something that we might sort of perform to live, right? And yeah, this is also featuring some of my go-to key sounds. If you're curious to know how any of these were made, I talk about that in another video. I've programmed this quick little demo guide drum loop to go with this when I play live, generally for my solo sets or with my band Luo. We play to an Ableton project like this, right? So I'll have all the track stems, all the parts are in a project like this, and I essentially mute or disable things that we're actually going to play live for real. When I'm playing live with my drummer Barney, this track would just be muted because he's going to do the drum part and I'm going to do the keys parts and stuff, so that all gets muted, but then certain elements stay as they are in the recorded version, and then I set up effects on them and stuff so that I can kind of mess about with them live. So we're not just like playing to like a CD, you know, there is some improvisation and interactivity that happens in the stems that we're playing to. Just to give you a quick blast of what this sort of sounds like, I just basically recreated quickly a little section from one of our tracks called Threnody, which is off our album Unspoken. Let's say that's the chorus, right? And then bar 21 is going to be the end. Right, let's get automating. Let's say that I want a bunch of stuff to happen here, right? So in the build-up, I want to be on my electric piano, sort of softer sound. When it gets to the chorus and things get a bit bigger, I want my grand piano and maybe a lead synth to kick in. And then when it gets to the end of the song here, I want it to change back to my whatever my starting sound was, in this case the E piano, but have a little bit of delay on the end there so it kind of trails off with it at that specific moment. I'm just going to go ahead and do that. If I drop in another region here, I'm going to make it the exact length of my song. And now if I start going in here and doing some automation, I should be able to create my live rig essentially. So good old chain selector automation. I'm going to go into here. So you can see I've got quite defined sections of my song, right? So at bar 5 up until bar 13, let's say, yeah, that's going to be my E piano sound. And that delay's on, so we want to make sure, get rid of that delay. Don't want that on, put that back to 0. Oh, that got rid of that. Let's do that again. Let's go back to the instrument rack, chain selector. Up until bar 13, I want to be using my E piano. Boom, I'm going to draw in a little point here. At bar 13, it's going to change to chain selector 1. And then when we get to bar 21, I'm going to change to a third scene. Why not? We're going to add a grand piano. I'm going to put that on scene chain 1, sorry. And you can see that that's actually layered with the analog synth. So I'm going to be getting grand piano and synth for that particular one. Let's maybe have a different... Let's have that rusty piano for the end. Just why not? Just because we can. And then I'm just going to make sure that that delay is doing what I wanted it to. So instrument, mixer, B delay. I want that to rise at bar 21 for my little trail off thing. And then, yeah, I'm also going to assign, yeah, that's still on there. That's great. So I'm just going to hit spacebar and kind of see what happens here. Hopefully it works. We can make my lead synth sound slightly more epic by putting a Valhalla vintage verb just on the analog, which you can do if you're using an effect rack rather than applying the reverb to like the whole keyboard. You can just have specific effects on specific sounds again, which is pretty cool. So yeah, Obviously I've not spent much time like fiddling with the parameters of my delays and stuff like that, but you can hear like what's possible there. Hopefully there's quite a bit going on there, and it's all just being controlled for me so I can focus on playing parts and fiddling with the fun bits of the sound, I guess. I'm gonna try something else here. Let's put on a filter on the whole keyboard. Let's automate a little filter sweep. If I go to the envelope controls, it's the auto filter, and then yeah, by the time the keys synth kicks in for the chorus, we want that filter to be completely off, I guess. So I don't know what this will sound like, but let's give it a go. The tuning of that particular patch is a little bit off there. And yeah, that's just kind of a small slice of what you can do with this method. And yeah, the sky's the limit really. Like, it doesn't become difficult to keep stacking up and arranging more sounds and just switching between them. You don't need a foot controller or a foot pedal to do this stuff. It just removes that, and you don't need a lot of external delays and effects because it can all just come from Ableton. It also opens up the possibility for like super tight live looping, that your loops start at the exact point that you need them to and they stop when you need them to in the song. You can control that all with Ableton. I'll probably do a separate video about that just on its own entirely. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, give us a like. And yeah, if you've got any questions about anything here, or you'd like me to cover another topic, please feel free to give me a shout. Hope you've enjoyed this, and yeah, cheers.